Hello everyone, Ron again, and in this video we're going to talk about the chord triads. Action.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
So the reason I emphasize the word triad is that these particular chords are going to be made up of 3 notes. Therefore, you can understand that there are chords that are made up of more than 3 notes. A chord is a group of 3 or more notes that are usually played together. But we are going to look at the triads. So let's start off with probably the most important one, the major chord. Maybe not most important to every music genre, but certainly most fundamental at least. So the way you make a major chord is you're going to start with a note, and it's going to be called the root note of the chord, whichever note you start with whenever you're making a chord. But that root of the chord does not have to be the root of the scale. So, for example, there are going to be chords in C major scale that are not involving the note C. And that's important to understand because every chord has a root and every scale has a root, but you can have chords in a scale that have different roots than the root of the scale itself. Because words like that are used in numerous ways. So you got a root of a chord and the root of the scale. So don't be confused as I'm explaining it. So here we go. Let's look at C natural because it's the easiest. And we'll probably discuss some chords from another scale as well. So let's make a major chord. The way you make a major chord is there are 3 ways that I'm going to give you to think about this. And the first way is using scale degrees. So if you know what the C major scale is, it is these notes. So this is probably the easiest way if you know the scale. To make a major chord, you take the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th of the scale. So the 1st of the C scale is C, the 3rd scale degree is E, and the 5th scale degree is going to be G. So you have C, E, G as the major chord. And you can add another C. It doesn't change that it is a C major triad because you add an octave to it. The next way to find a chord that we're going to look at is semitones. So you can think of it this way. You start on the root, which in this case is C. You go up 4 semitones. So you got C sharp, D, E flat, E. So the second one is E because the second note in the chord will be 4 semitones above the first one or the root. And the third one is going to be 7 semitones above the first one. So 7 semitones above C is G. So C, E, G. And the third way to think about it is as from the root, the second note is a major third higher, which still is E if you start on C. And the third note is a perfect fifth higher, which is G, of course. So those are the 3 ways that come to mind for me that you can make a chord depending on your preference. Now, these are all essentially saying the same thing, obviously, because you're getting the same chord, but it's like having 3 perspectives, so it's helpful. And keep in mind that for the sake of this video, I'm calling this the major chord, but there are different types of major chords and minor chords, and even diminished chords. So, for example, you have the C major triad, but you also have C major 7th. Right, so there is that. You also have the C minor triad, but then there's the C minor 7th. But that's the topic for another video, getting into different chords that are more than 3 notes. because those are important too for other reasons. And there are a few of them and they're cool. So for example, you have the C dominant. Those things all have their role, but today we're just talking about the triads. So keep in mind that C major does not necessitate it being a triad. That's another word or phrase that is used interchangeably between things, and it doesn't necessarily denote something specific, but it can be a range. So moving on, minor chords. How do you make a minor chord? From the perspective of the major scale. So C major. You take the root of the chord, which still is going to be C. You look at the third scale degree and then flatten it by one semitone. So the third scale degree is E. Flatten by one semitone, that's E flat. And then you take the fifth scale degree, so that's G. So you have C, E flat, G. Now understanding the namesake of the chord, from C to E flat is a minor third. So it is a minor chord. That makes sense, right? So constructing a minor chord, you're going to take the root note, which is the namesake of it. So C, you go up a minor third, which leaves you to E flat because it's three semitones. And then the third note of the chord is going to be a perfect fifth from the root note. So that still is G. And thinking about it in semitones, as I said, from C, you go up three semitones, and that's the second note. So C to E flat is three semitones away. And then the third note of the chord you get by going from the root, which is C, up seven semitones, which also is a perfect fifth. So that's G. So C, E flat, G is the C minor chord, the C minor triad. The next one is a diminished triad. So the way you find this is to flatten the fifth and the third of the major chord. So if the major chord was C, E, G, because you have the first, third, and fifth scale degrees, you flatten the third scale degree and you flatten the fifth scale degree. So you start off with C because that's going to be in it because it's the namesake, obviously, right? You wouldn't have a C chord without a C in it. That'd be strange. It would be funny, but it would be strange and confusing. So you start on C, and then you say the third of the C major scale is E and the fifth is G. So I'm going to flatten both of those notes. So I have E flat and I have G flat. And those are the three notes because the second two are the flattened third and the flattened fifth, respectively. So you have C, E flat, G. And that's a diminished chord, a diminished triad. If you think about it in terms of semitones, going from the root, which is C, you go up three semitones, E flat, and then you go up three more semitones. So, G flat. You could also consider the third note to be six semitones away from the root because it's the tritone. And that's what gives it the tension that you feel because the tritone is one of the most dissonant intervals alongside the minor second. So if you hear something in a movie that's like this, it creates a lot of tension because the notes are so close together. And if you hear a tritone, there's tension because it's just a very dissonant interval. So that's how you could use a diminished chord. So you can think of this as the flat third and fifth scale degree. So you got C, flat third, flat fifth. You have C going up three semitones, E flat, and up three more semitones, or six semitones from the root. Or you could think of it as starting on C, going up by a minor third, and either going up by another minor third or starting from C and the third note is 6 semitones or a tritone away. And the last one we're going to look at is the augmented chord, the augmented triad. So as it compares to the major triad, which would be the first, third, and fifth scale degrees, the fifth scale degree is sharpened by 1 semitone. So rather than having G, you will have G sharp. So you have the root, the third scale degree of its major scale, which is E, and you take the fifth and sharpen it. So you say to yourself, the fifth is G, so it's going to be 1 semitone higher, making it G sharp. So my chord is C, E, G sharp, and that's an augmented chord. The augmented chord is the chord that I use the least because I don't actually know how to use it intentionally at this point in music. And I have never really researched it, but I think I have done it in music without meaning to, because that's the thing that can happen. You can just search for stuff and you might have used it, but not knowing what it was called. And I definitely have encountered it in some songs that I have played that I've learned from like them being on my piano or from watching tutorials on YouTube and stuff like that. So I'm sure they have their use. They're probably in either European music or like classical music, but they sound really interesting. So, try them out. And pretty soon I'll probably try them out too. I'll see what the uses are and do research on it. And then maybe I can teach on it also. With that being said, those are the 4 triad types of chords. You got the major triad, the minor triad, the diminished triad, and the augmented triad. So let's look at it one more time, just using scale degrees with a different root note, because scale degrees is honestly the easiest way to figure this out. And that's why I keep emphasizing that you should learn the scales, because usually the chords are made from the scale degrees. It's not that you can't calculate it, but why would you want to? If you memorize the scales and you're like, oh, a major chord is the first, the third, and the fifth, then that's really super easy. Say something like C sharp major, rather than you saying like, all right, every note is sharp. If I'm thinking about it the way it is notated, C sharp, and then like D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, that could be confusing. Because you find yourself in a position where you say, all right, it is C sharp. And you're like, E sharp? And you remember it's F. And you're like, what is the fifth? It is G sharp. Rather than just knowing where it's at on the piano, So I emphasize which keys are black and which keys are white. So you think to yourself, the white keys in C sharp major are F and C, even if they're not notated that way when they are put onto a grand staff. But you know that, right? So when you're looking at the piano, you're like, oh, okay, every black key in F and C, and I start on C sharp. That's how I play the C sharp major scale. That's easier than thinking of it the way it's notated for the purpose of playing it. So you got from C sharp, every black key, and I play F and I play C when I pass them. I say, all right, F was the third key that I played, and G sharp was the fifth key that I played. So that means the major chord is made up of the C, C sharp, and those two. The minor chord, because F is the third, is going to be E because it's flattened by 1. The diminished chord is going to be C sharp, E, and G because the third and the fifth are flat. And then the augmented chord is going to be the first, the third, and the sharp and fifth. So it's going to be C sharp, F, and A. So knowing the scales makes these a lot easier to find and to understand. With that being said, that's all that I've got for today. And I'm satisfied now. I had to record this video like 3 times. I just kept getting interrupted, or I didn't like how it came out, even if I wasn't interrupted. You know, you don't know until you start doing a thing how much goes on in the background and how you have to separate yourself from distractions. So that's a key. Leave the cell phone somewhere else. And that's a free tip, especially when you're doing something musical, apparently, because people want to talk to you about stuff, and that's cool. I love to like talk to people and have conversations, but it can interfere with your actual productivity. But it's not their fault. They don't know. So you just take the good and throw away the bad. You're like, it's awesome. People want to communicate with me. Praise God. And with that being said, if you made it to the end of the video, I thank you for watching. And as usual, have an awesome day. Peace.